Hustle. New York is all about hustle. I'm a child of Holocaust survivors. They were immigrants. Immigrants are the ultimate entrepreneur. My father came here with nothing, up owning 26 restaurants. It's all about hustle.
Welcome to the Powerhouse. My name is Joshua Gonzalez. You can call me JG. Each episode, I sit down with a leader here in New York City to unpack one real decision under pressure. What were the stakes? What trade offs they faced? What they chose? And the values behind it. Then we write a short written breakdown in the Powerhouse newsletter on LinkedIn. So the lesson is easy to share, easy to remember, and useful. So if you ever had to make a hard call with imperfect information, this show is for you. Let's get it started. Our featured leader for today is the managing partner of Arkenstone Capital. He is also a partner at FF Venture Capital, and he invests in robotics, AI, and frontier technologies. He is the author of a startup field guide in the age of robotics and AI. Let's welcome Oliver Mitchell.
Thank you so much, JG. It's a pleasure.
Glad to have you here. So let's get on with your story. Tell me, where were you right before this decision? What was going on in your fund and in your head?
Sure. My experience has been a founder and operator. I've built companies, I've sold them to multinational organizations. I've had some amazing successes and what I would say some valuable life lessons. And so the decision that we're going to discuss today is when I was serving in the board capacity of my startup, Civ Robotics, which was formerly known as Civ Drone, and really to better understand the value of customer discovery and their pivot as a terrestrial robot into the solar space.
Awesome. Tell us, take us through this decision. What were the two choices in front of you? And what did each choice mean you'd be giving up?
Sure. So the company, I sourced the deal from the Technion in Israel, one of the great sort of engineering universities in the world. And they were two graduate students in civil engineering that really understood the pains of a construction site and said there must be a better way of doing surveying for big industrial projects like roadway construction, pipelines, data centers, solar farms. And so they developed a drone, a
Wow.
beautiful drone that had an 8-foot wingspan that was capable of doing autonomous staking. It had a gantry system that put a stake into the ground of where the point was where you're going to put the beam or the pile, where you're going to construct from. And there's so many mistakes that happen in construction, human error that are very costly. And they knew that they were on jobs where millions of dollars was lost based upon that human error. So they were really trying to address that with a drone. And they did a little bit of customer discovery, and they asked people what they thought of drones. And when I knew them early on, I helped bring them here to the United States,
Mhm.
got them involved in the Genius New York Accelerator, which is an amazing place in Syracuse that is located next to an FAA test site. And so they were able to fast track the development of their drone. And then they went back out to their initial customers and like, hey, we got it. We got a drone. We got a drone. Isn't this great? And everyone's like, yeah, it's great. They're like, okay, how many units do you want to buy? They're like, well, we said we like drones. We never said we're going to buy drones. And I said, this is why we need a tool that can go out for 9 hours, not 45 hours of mission life. We need something that can be going out in all weather. Drones are affected by wind and rain, and we need something that's going to go in snow and mud in the desert that's going to be out there. And tell you the truth, the biggest use case turns out to be solar farms, industrial solar. And so they went back to the drawing board and came out with a terrestrial robot and went out to some of the largest players and developers within the solar space, and it served their needs. And they do tens of thousands of points a week that would take teams of 16 plus human surveyors to mark. And once again, there could be human error involved. So they have greater accuracy, half the cost, and 10 times the speed.
So, what made this decision hard for you?
I think, when you have any startup and you've invested so much resources, so much engineering time, and you have to, go to a capital raise. And so to pivot, that's going to, take you back weeks and you're going to burn a lot of cash. And if you're unsuccessful, you will be unsuccessful raising more capital. And without capital, startups stop. And so it was a very high stakes decision process to go through that. But we were validated by a deeper customer discovery. And that's why I wrote the book, A
Mm.
Startup Field Guide in the Age of Robots and AI. My first, chapters on customer discovery. I started off with Mick Mounts, who started out in Webvan, which was this huge dot-com bust, blew through 800 million. They were the first online grocer. And they were, as Mick said, they were taping $20 to every package that went out the door because they were so inefficient. And so after Webvan, he started to really analyze what does e-commerce fulfillment look like, and what do we need? We need a mobile robot to move the shelving to the picker, and so we could fulfill your package. And so through that, he built up a company that Amazon bought for $775 million. That was deep customer discovery that got him to that sort of a liquidity event. And likewise, Civ Robotics is doing deep customer discovery, and they've been very successful in raising more capital, introducing new products, and expanding, most importantly, their sales base.
Wow, interesting. During this decision of yours, take us through the moment when it all became real. Where were you? What set it off? Who did you call? And what did you do next?
Sure, sure. Now, I was a board member. I was not an active manager there. So my job is to support and coach the founders, but I'm very proactive with the board, with a startup. And so, I supported the decision to invest in product development. I supported the team, and I really helped introduce them to customers, and really helped, to support their existing customer growth. And at the same time, they needed more capital. So what I could do is lead another financing round and bring in additional investors. In fact, brought in a co-lead, Alicorp, and really be evangelical
Mhm.
about what I believe this company is capable of. I believe that Civ Robotics could be the next Caterpillar. And
Wow.
I shared that belief with everybody that I knew within the investment community, and got them more capital to really, follow this business plan, to go into solar with a terrestrial robot and to grow. And they've turned on like over 20 gigawatts of power. They have hundreds of sites out there. And Alicorp, the investors I brought into their seed round has now led their A round. And so, it's been a very successful strategy. We also have corporate investors like Trimble and Bobcat as well.
Interesting. Based on this pivot that this company made, what showed up in the first 30 to 90 days of operation?
Yeah. I think, what really showed up was that the level of enthusiasm
Mhm.
that their customers had for using this. And they had one real big inflection point where that over like a 3-week period, they did like, I think, 100,000 points. That would have been not feasible for a human team to do in that amount of time.
Oh.
And so, that it was very early on where you could see the real value proposition of the product that they were introducing. It filled a real need, and it was supported by customer growth. And so, and we saw that growth and that support grow from 30 to 60 to 90 to 6 months. That's why we invested. And then we saw other opportunities for growth, whether that's in road striping, striping the lines on roads that you're going to
Mhm.
paint, or whether that's in building hyperscaling data centers, or whether that's material handling. They have a company called Civ Move now that
Right.
moves the piles. So they mark where the piles, those beams will go for the solar cells. Now they can move those piles and distribute them to the right spots. And so we saw that very early on, that by focusing on this terrestrial robot, it could create a family of robots and opportunities there, that where we could have a real product line. And I think that's really important, especially for a hardware company, that they're just not a one horse pony, but they actually have a herd that they're selling into the industry. And that is supported by now our global expansion in the Gulf states, in India, in Europe.
You mentioned in your book that you talked about the deep customer discovery, right? This concept. Can you tell us more about it, and how could it inform emerging leaders on making better decisions?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of Steve Blank, and he has a great book called The Startup Owner's Manual. And it really, he actually, speaks a lot about Webvan and in that book and about how they didn't do enough customer discovery to know what customers wanted. And I took
Mhm.
the opposite approach. I was like, but their hardware was inefficient too. Because I wrote this book because I did not find anything really addressing the needs of people within frontier tech. That, there's a whole bunch of investors, but there's a whole limited amount of investors investing in hardware and applied AI around hardware. And so that, I really felt that there was this special need to write a book of how to take your idea from, napkin drawing all the way to IPO. So I interviewed like 30 great founders, luminaries in the space, people like Rodney Brooks and Helen Grenier, about iRobot. And I talked about team building with them, how they were able to start out, a spin out of MIT and then go and build a publicly traded company. And I spoke to Nick Radford, who ran NASA's robotic lab, who has a humanoid company today, Persona AI. And
Wow.
I spoke to a whole bunch, Ryan Garby of ClearPath Robotics. And it all starts with customer discovery. Steve Blank and Eric Ries speak about the lean startup approach. And I definitely subscribe to that you don't want to build this entire infrastructure and wait for people to come. You really want to start lean, test it out, really create that feedback loop to customers. And you really want to speak to at least 500 potential customers, not your
Cool.
mother and your brother, but really the ultimate decision makers. And you want to ask them, well, what do you think? Not just what do you think, but how much are you going to pay for it? And you might find they'll say, something, Josh, you're in the right chapter, wrong page. And if you did this, and this, then we'd buy it. And that helps you evolve, and creating that feedback loop, that iteration cycle will help you evolve. So then the inflection point where to invest your capital. And that's where customer discovery comes. And from there, the right team to get and the right people to attract and the right investors. And not all I speak about in the book, not all investors are the same. Some are
Mhm.
financial investors like me. Some are corporate investors. There has to be a strategic fit. Some are government. And there has to be a need, there as well. And so you really have to look at the motivations. And then I talk about scaling and growing internationally and through dealer networks, and then all the way to your exit, your liquidity event.
You mentioned that it's all about that need. You're not supposed to, well, say, build something, especially for hardware companies where you got to invest in infrastructure. There's a lot of expenses, especially for CapEx. What do you think these, let's say, first time founders, where do they stumble upon? Where do they make that first mistake?
They make the mistake of just listening to themselves and not getting out of the building and speaking
Mhm.
to customers. And so, not everyone could be Steve Jobs and figure out like this is what everybody wants, right? That's
Right.
very rare. And not everybody, even Elon Musk today. The best way is to get out to customers early,
Mhm.
get an MVP as quickly as possible, and iterate and create that feedback loop and that trust. The thing I speak about the 5 rules of hardware startups. You need high utility. A robot needs to be constantly working. You can't build a robot for 2 hours a day to lift a 8-ton, package. And the other 22 hours it's collecting dust. That's not efficient. You could have a crane, so like you need a high utility. You need to have high reliability. In industry, shit can't fail, because it can lead to catastrophic damage. We're all used to, starting up a computer and rebooting, but in industry, you don't have that luxury. And people have very low threshold when machines fail. Think about it when Waymo causes an accident, how
Oh,
everyone wants to shut it down. How many accidents are caused by human drivers? And then you need payback, a reasonable payback.
right.
No, you can't just expect something to be, 10 times the cost, half the efficacy, and 10% the speed.
Mhm.
It really needs to be payback. And Rodney Brooks, founded by Robot, would speak a lot of that. The Roomba only has one button,
Mhm.
clean. And, it really is very easy. And the minute it goes underneath your bed and it dings that you got to empty that container, you're like, wow, this thing is great. $500. I didn't even know I had this much dust underneath my bed. The payback is instantaneous, and I really need that moment. You also need to, protect your IP, and you need, you know, to have the marketing plan as well. But accomplishing those 3 sets you on the right path.
Interesting. One of my theses about the biggest disruption of robotics is actually industries that make them run 24/7, right? Because that's they only need energy, and if they could do things 24/7, these industries are gonna get impacted. Where do you see this first that could happen, and then maybe the next 3 to 5 years?
Right. I see everything being automated,
Mhm.
but I see the home last.
The home is last. Oh,
So there's a big, humanoids. There's maybe like 100 humanoid companies. A lot of them are in China. 6 of them are in the United States.
mhm.
And I'm an advisor to Persona AI. Now, Figure AI, is worth like 32 billion. Aptronic is 6 billion today. You know, Aptronic's in light industry. Figure it looks like it's going after the home, and Optimus, which Tesla spends 2 billion a year on, is definitely going to go after the home. The home to me is a black hole because everyone's home different. While there might be available training data on folding and loading dishwashers, I'm really good at loading the dishwasher. It's what my job in the home. It's like Tetris for me. I do it like in 2 minutes and everything like that. I
Right.
don't need a robot, and I know like there's a now robot coming out by 1X. By the way, that's teleoperated. I don't know if you want somebody in India, looking at you and your wife, while you guys are having an argument or doing whatever, I don't think you want that intrusion into your home. So
Right.
I think, the opportunity is into heavy industry where there is underemployment. So Persona AI is specifically going after high skill labor in heavy industry. The first one being shipbuilding. This is a national priority that the president has spoken about. This is a really critical thing. I'm here in New York City, in Manhattan. Across the river from me is Brooklyn. The Brooklyn Navy Yards used to build one ship a week.
Mhm.
Last year in the United States of America, we built 3.
Wow.
China built 300.
Right.
So, and the reason being uh, uh, is that people would rather be influencers than welders.
Mhm.
Uh, this generation is not following what their grandparents did and their grandparents. They'd rather sell belts on Etsy or be influencers with their iPhone. And this is not just a problem here in the United States. Our allies in
Mhm.
South Korea, where Persona has a contract with Hyundai HD,
Mhm.
it's for shipbuilding, for welding. They go to Vietnam and Thailand to educate farmers on welding, bring them to South Korea to build ships. But you know what happens after 6 months?
Mhm.
They go back to Vietnam and Thailand because they're farmers and they're
Right.
not welders and they can't hire in South Korea. That's why they want humanoids. It's not to replace people. It's
Right.
that people are not fulfilling those jobs. And so
Mhm.
the first area that I think of humanoids is heavy industry. Obviously, there's lots of robots being deployed right now in e-commerce fulfillment and
Mhm.
logistics. We have an investment in Burrow in agriculture, Civ Robotics is in construction tech. I'm an investor in Cambrian Robotics, which is in smart manufacturing. These have been using robots, for a really long time. In manufacturing, we've been using robots since the 60s in automotive. This is a very, you know, uh, open industry that trusts this types of technology. And it all will come down to that trust cycle, as more industries adopt automation.
Great. Before, I know it's already a segue, we'll go back to our main line of discussion. Maybe tell us like a good rule that you used to make this decision, like a pivot or any other investment decision that emerging leaders across the world can easily apply and emulate.
Yeah, I mean, I I would say it's fairly simple and it's binary. I
Mm,
would say, does this get us closer to our goal or does this move us further away?
mm,
And so if our goal in the case of Civ Robotics is getting more sales deployments, increasing our go to market, raising more capital, turning into the next Caterpillar, I'd rather fail early on the drone and pivot to a terrestrial robot any day of the week. And so you really have to look at it as a gauge, like when you go to the City Field and you go to a Mets game. I'm a Mets fan, and they have a noise meter. That's how you should look at it. You want to be loud, and you want to ask, "Does this get me closer to my goal?" You want that to be the noise meter, that line going off the dial.
Let's talk about Civ Drone and your story. Knowing it could burn weeks of cash or make fundraising harder, what gave you that conviction to push for that change?
Yeah, it was not just weeks of cash, it was months. And, it was maybe a half a year. And, The risk was very high. They already invested so much into the drone. They actually had the drone. They had the team, and a terrestrial robot requires a different type of team, a different type of engineer, and you're talking about a different type of locomotion and different factors within a robot. Thousands of points of failure, and you're introducing new instances into those events, and so. But what drove me was speaking to customers and the
Mhm.
conviction that they shared that if we would be able to pivot to a terrestrial robot, they would believe in us and they would support us by using our new system. And so, it goes back to that customer discovery,
Mhm.
step. You can't skip over it. And too often, I've seen too many solutions looking for a problem. Here was a team that intimately knew the problem, and it was just a misdirected solution. And they were lucky enough to have some of the biggest construction names in the world giving them feedback and directing them to the right solution.
They were lucky because is that was were you the one that made that introduction to them, this main potential customer?
They were very involved in getting out to the industry, going to trade
Mhm.
shows, networking, and so, hats off to the founders, Tommy Shore and Liav Mueller, who really made those early connections to have the right partners who almost they were customers, but they availed themselves almost as design partners.
I see. All right, we'll now go to New York quick fire questions. So, number one, what will be your coffee order in the city?
Uh, Iced Americano.
There we go. What will be your bagel order?
Ever since H&H closed on 2nd and Broadway, I've not really bought bagels, but I guess it would be, Scottish smoked salmon on a toasted pumpernickel.
What's a local spot that deserves more attention?
There's a great, bar just, near my house called George Keeley's. Great to watch games, great to meet friends for a beer. They have they cycle through 200 draft beers a year.
What's a go to restaurant for big celebrations? Where are you booking?
I'm kosher, so my options are limited.
Mhm.
Barnea is really great. Abaita is really great, but down the block, from where we live is a place called Nui Dui, an Italian place, so we often go there.
What subway behavior should be illegal?
I mean, so many subway behaviors are illegal and people don't know it. You can't eat on the subway. You can't smoke on the subway. You can't do any bodily personal things on the subway. And unfortunately, all those get abused on every car. But talking loudly
Mm.
and having a big backpack on a crowded train is not the most considerate thing.
Which New York neighborhood is basically your personality and why?
I wish I was cool to say the Village, but I live on the Upper West Side.
Home turf, right?
Yeah.
So if New York had a signature scent, what is it?
Well, unfortunately, it's usually a mixture of like horse poop and pot and urine, but I wish it smelled like Chanel number 5.
There we go. So finish this sentence. In New York, you can blank.
You could get anything you want at any time of day.
What's the most New York thing you've done ever?
I'm a born and raised New Yorker, so I've done a lot, but I guessed, slyly before Uber would be like getting in front of the person hailing the cab, like a half a block before the person.
That's great. The final question, one sentence. What did New York teach you?
Hustle. New York is all about hustle. I'm a child of Holocaust survivors. They were immigrants. Immigrants are the ultimate entrepreneur. My father came here with nothing, ended up owning 26 restaurants. It's all about hustle.
Love it. Okay. So, Oliver, thank you for coming. What is your final remarks and where can they find you and where can they find your book?
Well, let's work backwards. My book is a startup field guide in the age of robots and AI, published by Chapman and Hall, which my namesake is after Oliver Twist, and Chapman and Hall was Charles Dickens' publisher, so that's kind of awesome. They could find this on Amazon. Just type in a startup field guide in the age of robots and AI, and you said you're going to put a link on your site. They could find me on LinkedIn, Oliver Mitchell. It's pretty easy to find me there, and I'm around. I go to networking events especially the ones in the physical intelligence space.
And final remarks to emerging leaders across the world, and how could they make better decisions, change their life?
Yeah, I mean, first, surround yourself with great partners. My friend Howard Morgan said he's going to write a book about partners, and he's been fortunate to have some of the best partners out there. Jim Simons with Renaissance Capital, and Josh Koppelman with First Round Capital. And he's like 85, and he could talk all about finding good partners, and that's really important. I think follow your passion. Don't just do something a startup just because it sounds good and you read some Gartner study and he said, "Okay, I'm gonna do that." You gotta really know the problem intimately and you have to be really passionate about it. Move fast, but slow down to do enough customer discovery. Don't just, run your company by PowerPoint slides.
Awesome.
And finally, buy the book.
And get the book, especially if you are in the hard sciences, right? And
Yeah.
hardware business. So thank you very much, Oliver, for dropping by. Appreciate your time. And of course, to our audience, see you in the next episode.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This was great.